A beacon in the night. The night was still, and the air carried a cool serenity. Max Harper sat quietly on the old wooden bench in his backyard, his eyes tracing constellations that had become familiar companions. Life on the outskirts of Pinecrest was predictable, almost monotonous, but Max had chosen it for its simplicity. A former engineer, he had traded the chaos of city life for the silence of the countryside, seeking solace among the trees and stars. That tranquility shattered in an instant. A streak of light tore through the sky, brighter and fiercer than anything Max had ever seen. It wasn't a shooting star, it was deliberate, controlled, purposeful. The glow intensified, painting the forest and fields in stark white as the object descended rapidly, crashing into the earth just beyond the tree-line. The ground trembled, and a thunderous boom echoed through the night, scattering birds into the darkness. Max froze, his breath caught in his throat. For a moment, he questioned if he'd imagined it, but the faint glow emanating from the forest's edge confirmed otherwise. Adrenaline coursed through his veins, and curiosity tugged at his feet. Grabbing a flashlight, he stepped cautiously toward the source of the disturbance. As he entered the forest, the faint hum of energy filled the air. The trees seemed to whisper secrets, their leaves rustling with an unnatural rhythm. The glow grew brighter with each step until Max stumbled into a clearing. His breath hitched. In the center of the clearing lay a vessel unlike anything he could have imagined. Sleek and organic, its surface shimmered like liquid silver, reflecting the surrounding trees. It pulsed with a gentle blue light, almost as if it were alive. The shape was smooth and seamless, devoid of any visible seams or markings, a design no human could replicate. Max hesitated, his mind racing. Was it military? Experimental technology? Or something far beyond Earth's grasp? He approached slowly, his flashlight trembling in his grip. Suddenly, a soft hiss filled the air, and a section of the vessel's surface began to dissolve. Max took a step back, his instincts screaming for him to flee, but his feet remained rooted. From the opening emerged a figure that defied comprehension. She stepped forward, her movements graceful yet deliberate. Her skin glimmered with a metallic sheen, hues of deep blue and violet shifting with each step. Her eyes were luminous, pools of liquid silver that seemed to peer into Max's very soul. Patterns of glowing lines ran along her body, pulsing softly like veins of light. She was undeniably alien, yet there was an unmistakable air of humanity in the way she carried herself, vulnerable, yet strong. Max's voice caught in his throat as their eyes met. The alien woman paused, her expression unreadable, before tears began streaming down her face. They weren't ordinary tears. They shimmered like molten starlight, cascading down her cheeks and onto the earth below. The sight was as beautiful as it was heart-wrenching. Max found his voice, though it was shaky. Are you okay?" he stammered. She tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. Then, without moving her lips, he heard her voice, a melodic, haunting whisper that resonated in his mind. "You are the one." The words sent a shiver down his spine. The one? The one for what? Max's mind reeled with questions, but the alien woman stepped closer, her hand outstretched. Instinctively, he reached out, and their hands met. A warmth unlike anything he'd ever felt spread through him, filling him with a strange sense of familiarity. In that moment, Max saw flashes of images, not memories, but visions. A great void consuming stars. Civilizations crumbling under an unseen force. A planet bathed in light, its people reaching out in desperation. And then, he saw himself, standing at the center of it all. The visions faded, leaving Max breathless. The woman's tears continued to fall, her gaze now filled with sorrow and urgency. "You must remember," her voice echoed in his mind. "Remember what?" Max demanded, his frustration and fear bubbling to the surface. "Who are you? What's happening?" Before she could respond, a deep rumble shook the clearing. Max looked up to see a massive shadow descending from the clouds. It was another ship, far larger and more ominous than the first. Its surface rippled with dark energy, and the very air seemed to warp around it. A beam of light shot out from its underside, scanning the clearing like an all-seeing eye. The alien woman stiffened, her luminous eyes locking onto Max. "They are coming," she said, her voice trembling. "You must run." "Run? Run where?" Max's voice cracked. "What's going on?" Before he could press further, the beam of light shifted, locking onto the woman. Her body tensed, and her glowing patterns flared brightly. She turned to Max one last time, her expression a mixture of desperation and resolve. "Remember who you are," she whispered. The light engulfed her, and in a flash, she was gone. Max stood alone in the clearing, his mind racing and his heart pounding. The massive ship lingered for a moment before retreating into the clouds, leaving behind an eerie silence. The only trace of the encounter was a faintly glowing symbol carved into the earth where the woman had stood, a symbol that pulsed faintly before fading into darkness. Max sank to his knees, his world forever changed. The stars above seemed colder, more distant, as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. Deep down, he knew one thing for certain: his life would never be the same, the echoes of the unknown. Max Harper remained frozen in the clearing, the faint glow of the alien symbol etched into the earth seared into his memory. The wind rustled the treetops, carrying a haunting emptiness that mirrored his state of mind. For a man who had always prided himself on logic and reason, what he had just witnessed defied comprehension. His heart pounded as he replayed her words over and over in his head. "You are the one. Remember who you are." What did she mean? Who were the ones coming? And why him, of all people? Max stared at the now empty sky, hoping for answers that wouldn't come. Finally, after what felt like hours, he stood and made his way back to the house. The weight of the encounter hung heavily on his shoulders. A haunting message. Sleep eluded Max that night. He tossed and turned, his mind replaying the events in vivid detail. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, those luminous silver eyes, filled with sorrow and urgency. The visions she had shared with him lingered, fragmented and chaotic. Planets in ruin. A void consuming galaxies. A symbol of hope hidden among the stars. At dawn, Max gave up on sleep and retreated to his study. The small room was cluttered with books, tools, and remnants of his old engineering projects. On the desk lay a sketchpad, and with trembling hands, Max began to draw the symbol the woman had carved into the ground. He sketched every detail from memory, the central circle, the radiating lines, and the intricate dots that seemed to form a constellation. When he was done, he stared at the drawing, hoping it would offer some revelation. It didn't. "What do you want from me?" he muttered, his voice breaking the heavy silence of the room. As if in response, the power in the house flickered. The lights dimmed, and a strange hum filled the air. Max's heart raced as he grabbed a flashlight and ran to the window. The clearing where the ship had landed the previous night glowed faintly, the earth pulsating as if it were alive. Against his better judgment, Max ventured back outside, flashlight in hand. The forest speaks. The forest was different now. The trees seemed to lean closer, their branches stretching toward him as if they were alive. The air crackled with energy, and the faint hum grew louder with every step he took. Max's instincts screamed at him to turn back, but a strange force compelled him to press on. When he reached the clearing, he froze. The alien symbol had returned, glowing faintly in the dirt. But this time, it wasn't alone. Around it, smaller symbols had appeared, arranged in a pattern that seemed deliberate, almost ritualistic. Max knelt beside them, his hands trembling as he traced the glowing lines. "What does it mean?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum. As if in response, the ground beneath him trembled. A beam of light shot out from the center of the largest symbol, enveloping Max in its glow. He shielded his eyes, but the light wasn't blinding, it was warm, almost comforting. In the light, he saw fragments of images, clearer than before. He saw a great war among the stars, ships locked in fiery battles against an unseen force. He saw the alien woman, standing at the forefront of her people, her face resolute yet burdened with despair. He saw a device small, intricate, and glowing with the same energy as the symbols. It was a key, the images whispered, though Max didn't know what it unlocked. The vision shifted. Max saw himself holding the device, standing on a barren planet under a sky filled with twin suns. He wasn't alone. Beside him stood the alien woman, her silver eyes filled with hope. Around them, figures, human and alien alike, fought against a shadowy force that loomed on the horizon. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the vision ended. The light vanished, and Max was left gasping for air, the symbols around him now lifeless. The arrival of the stranger. Max stumbled back to the house, his mind spinning with questions. Who were these people? What role did he play in their fight? And what was the strange device he had seen? As he entered the house, he was greeted by a sound that made his blood run cold, a knock at the door. In his years of living in isolation, Max could count on one hand the number of visitors he'd received. His nearest neighbors were miles away, and the forest wasn't exactly a hotspot for tourists. He approached the door cautiously, grabbing a wrench from the counter as a makeshift weapon. When he opened it, he was met with a man who looked as out of place as a comet in a clear sky. The stranger was tall and wiry, his skin pale and weathered as if he had spent a lifetime under alien suns. His eyes, an unsettling shade of gold, glinted in the morning light. He wore a patchwork coat made of unfamiliar fabrics, and around his neck hung a pendant bearing the same symbol Max had seen in the clearing. "You've been chosen," the man said, his voice deep and gravelly. Max tightened his grip on the wrench. "Chosen for what? Who are you?" The stranger stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his golden eyes scanning the room. "My name is Eris. I'm here to guide you." "Guide me where?" Max demanded, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "I don't know what's going on. I don't even know who you are." Eris turned to face him, his expression grave. "You've been marked," he said, pointing to the sketch pad on the desk where Max had drawn the symbol. "That mark ties you to something far greater than yourself." "You've seen the visions, haven't you?" Max hesitated but nodded. "Then you know what's coming," Eris said. "The void is spreading. It has already consumed entire galaxies. Your world is next." Max's knees threatened to buckle. "What do you expect me to do about it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just a man. I can't stop something like that." "You can," Eris said firmly. "Because you're not just a man. You are the key." Max stared at him, his mind reeling. The key. He had heard those words before, in the visions. But what did they mean? And why him? Before Max could ask, Eris placed a hand on his shoulder. "There's no time to explain everything," he said. "But you need to come with me. If we don't act now, it'll be too late." Max hesitated. Every instinct told him to stay, to cling to the life he knew. But deep down, he felt a pull, an unexplainable urge to follow this stranger into the unknown. Taking a deep breath, Max made his decision, into the unknown. Max Harper hesitated on the threshold of his own home, staring at Eris as the stranger's golden eyes bore into him. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, each second feeling heavier than the last. The quiet life Max had carefully built for himself was slipping away, replaced by a terrifying and incomprehensible new reality. But beneath the fear, there was something else, a spark of curiosity, a strange and undeniable pull to uncover the truth. "Where are we going?" Max finally asked, his voice hoarse but steady. Eris smirked, a flash of confidence lighting up his otherwise weary face. "Somewhere safe, at least for now. The ones who took her won't be far behind, and they won't stop until they find you." Max flinched. The ones who took her. The image of the alien woman, her silver tears glistening in the moonlight, flashed in his mind. She had sacrificed herself to protect him, but from what? And why? Before he could voice his questions, Eris turned on his heel and strode out into the clearing. Max hesitated for only a moment before following, his heart pounding in his chest. The symbols that had glowed so brightly earlier were now dormant, etched into the ground like ancient ruins. Eris stopped in the center of the clearing, pulled a small, cylindrical device from his coat, and twisted its top. A high-pitched hum filled the air, and the space around them shimmered. For a brief moment, Max felt as though he were standing between two realities, the edges of the forest warping and bending like liquid. Then, with a blinding flash of light, a structure materialized before them. It was sleek and angular, a far cry from the organic curves of the alien woman ship. The surface was matte black, absorbing the faint light of the clearing, and it radiated an ominous energy. Eris walked toward it without hesitation, a panel sliding open at his approach. "Get in," Eris said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Max hesitated on the threshold, glancing back at the house that had been his sanctuary. It seemed so small and insignificant now, a relic of a life he was about to leave behind. Steeling himself, he stepped inside. The vessel. The interior of the ship was surprisingly spacious, with a layout that seemed both functional and otherworldly. The walls were smooth and seamless, illuminated by soft, pulsating lights embedded within the surface. Strange symbols glowed faintly along the edges, similar to the ones Max had seen in the clearing. Eris moved swiftly to the center console, his fingers gliding over a holographic display that appeared in mid-air. Max stood awkwardly by the entrance, his eyes darting around the room. Despite the sleek design, the air inside the vessel carried a sense of wear and age, as though it had seen countless battles and journeys. "Strap in," Eris said without looking up from the display. "Strap in where?" Max asked, his voice laced with irritation. "There aren't any seats." Eris sighed and gestured to the side wall. As if responding to his command, a section of the wall folded outward, forming a chair-like structure. Max hesitated before sitting, the surface of the seat surprisingly warm and pliable. Straps emerged from the backrest, securing him in place. "This ship isn't built for comfort," Eris said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "But it'll keep you alive, which is more than I can say for what's out there." Max ignored the jab, his mind too preoccupied with the flood of questions swirling within him. What exactly is out there? What are we running from? Eris paused, his fingers hovering over the holographic display. He turned to face Max, his expression grim. "They're called the Voidborn. A race older than any star you've ever seen. They consume worlds, devour civilizations, and leave nothing but emptiness in their wake." Max's stomach twisted. "And they're coming here?" "They already are," Eris replied. "That woman you met, her people were one of the last lines of defense. But they're gone now, scattered or destroyed. She sacrificed herself to buy us time, but the Voidborn won't stop until they've found what they're looking for." Max swallowed hard. "And what are they looking for?" Eris leaned forward, his golden eyes locking onto Max's. "You. The weight of destiny." The word hung in the air like a heavy stone, and Max felt its weight settle on his chest. He wanted to protest, to deny that he could possibly matter in the grand scheme of things, but the visions he'd seen told a different story. Deep down, he knew there was truth in Eris's words, even if he didn't fully understand it. "Why me?" Max asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Eris's expression softened, a flicker of sympathy breaking through his stern exterior. "I don't know," he admitted. "But the symbols, the visions, they all point to you. Somehow, you're connected to this. You're the key to stopping the Voidborn." Max's hands clenched into fists. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't even extraordinary. He was just a man who had chosen a quiet life away from the chaos of the world. But now, that chaos had found him, and there was no escaping it. Before Max could respond, the ship shuddered violently. The lights flickered, and a blaring alarm filled the air. Eris cursed under his breath and turned back to the console. "They've found us," he muttered. Max's heart raced. "The Voidborn?" "Not yet," Eris replied. "But they're scouts, mercenaries who do their dirty work." A holographic display showed several small ships closing in on their position, their movements erratic but purposeful. Eris's hands flew over the controls, and the vessel lurched as it shot into the air. Max was pressed back into his seat, the straps digging into his shoulders. The ship swerved and weaved, the hum of its engines rising to a fever pitch. Max caught glimpses of the pursuing ships through a translucent panel in the wall, sleek, insect-like craft that glinted ominously in the moonlight. Beams of energy shot past them, narrowly missing their mark. "Hold on!" Eris shouted. The ship dove sharply, skimming the treetops before accelerating into the open sky. The pursuing ships followed, their weapons firing relentlessly. Max gritted his teeth, his knuckles white as he gripped the edges of his seat. "Can't this thing go faster?" he yelled. "Working on it." Eris snapped, his fingers a blur on the controls. The ship suddenly banked hard to the left, and one of the pursuing craft overshot, colliding with a tree and exploding in a fiery burst. Eris smirked, but his victory was short-lived. The remaining ships closed in, their firepower intensifying. Max's pulse pounded in his ears as the ship hurtled through the sky. The world outside was a blur, the stars streaking past like molten silver. For the first time, Max realized the enormity of what he was facing and the role he would have to play. The storm beyond the stars. The ship trembled violently as another volley of energy blasts struck its shielding. Max clung to his seat, his heart racing with every lurch and jolt. Around him, the interior lights flickered, casting frantic shadows against the seamless walls. Eris cursed under his breath, his fingers moving rapidly over the holographic controls. "They're faster than I expected," Eris muttered, his golden eyes narrowing. "But they'll wish they weren't." Max craned his neck to see what Eris was doing, but the holographic symbols made no sense to him. "Faster? How is that helpful if they're about to blow us out of the sky?" Eris grinned, a hint of mischief breaking through his grim expression. "Because speed can be a weapon, too." The ship suddenly surged forward, accelerating at a rate that left Max's stomach behind. The gravitational pull pinned him against the seat, the straps digging into his chest. Outside, the stars blurred into streaks of light, and the pursuing ships struggled to keep up. But as fast as Eris's ship was, their attackers weren't giving up. A beam of energy grazed the ship, sending a shudder through its frame. Warning lights flared on the control panel, and a loud, grating hum echoed through the cabin. Eris muttered something under his breath, his hands working furiously to stabilize the vessel. "Brace yourself," he shouted. Before Max could ask why, the ship dove sharply, spinning as it descended. The motion was dizzying, and Max's vision blurred as the world outside became a chaotic swirl of stars and darkness. One of the pursuing ships overshot them, spiraling out of control before exploding in a blinding burst of light. Max felt a brief surge of relief, but it was short-lived. The remaining ships adjusted their trajectory, locking onto Eris's vessel with renewed determination. The rift gate. "Time for Plan B," Eris said, his voice tight with focus. "Plan B? What happened to Plan A?" Max shot back, gripping the edges of his seat as the ship twisted through space. Plan A was not dying. Plan B is slightly riskier. Max didn't like the sound of that, but before he could protest, Eris reached for a small, glowing orb embedded in the console. He twisted it sharply, and the entire ship vibrated with a deep, resonant hum. Ahead of them, the fabric of space seemed to ripple, bending and warping like the surface of a pond. "What is that?" Max asked, his voice trembling. "Rift gate," Eris replied. "A shortcut." "Sort of." "Sort of?" "Let's just say it's not the smoothest ride," Eris admitted, flashing a grin that did nothing to reassure Max. The pursuing ships fired another volley of energy blasts, but before they could make contact, Eris's ship shot forward, plunging into the shimmering rift. The world around them dissolved into chaos. Colors that Max couldn't name swirled and danced outside the ship, and the walls seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy. He felt a strange pressure in his chest, as though the very air around him was trying to pull him apart. "Hold on!" Eris shouted, gripping the controls with both hands. Max didn't need to be told twice. He squeezed his eyes shut, his mind racing with a mixture of fear and awe. The sensations were overwhelming, as if the rift itself were alive, testing their resilience as they hurtled through its chaotic expanse. A desperate landing. After what felt like an eternity, the ship burst out of the rift into the calm void of space. Max gasped for air, his body trembling from the ordeal. He opened his eyes slowly, half expecting to find himself in pieces, but the ship was intact. Outside the window, a strange, alien world loomed, a planet bathed in golden light, its surface crisscrossed with rivers of molten silver. Eris exhaled sharply, his shoulders relaxing for the first time since the chase had begun. "Made it," he said, almost to himself. Where are we? Max managed to ask, his voice shaky. Safe for now, Eris replied, guiding the ship toward the planet's surface. This is an old outpost. Abandoned, mostly. But it'll give us some time to regroup. The ship descended rapidly, piercing through the planet's golden atmosphere. Below, jagged mountains rose like jagged teeth, their peaks shimmering with a metallic sheen. In the valleys between them, strange bioluminescent plants cast an eerie glow, illuminating the landscape in hues of blue and green. The landing was rough. The ship skidded across a flat plateau, sending up plumes of golden dust before finally coming to a halt. Max unbuckled himself, his legs shaky as he stood. The interior lights flickered, and the hum of the ship's engines faded into silence. Eris grabbed a pack from the wall and slung it over his shoulder. We need to move quickly, he said, heading for the exit. Max hesitated. Move quickly? To where? What's out there? Eris stopped and turned to face him. Answers, he said simply. The forgotten outpost. The air outside was thick and humid, carrying a faint metallic tang. Max followed Eris across the plateau, his eyes darting nervously at the alien landscape around them. Strange, insect-like creatures scuttled across the ground, their bodies glinting in the golden light. In the distance, a massive structure loomed, an angular, metallic tower that seemed to hum with a faint energy. What is this place? Max asked, struggling to keep up with Eris's brisk pace. An outpost from the old war, Eris replied. Built by the same people who sent her to you. Max's heart skipped a beat. The woman? She was part of a war? Eris nodded grimly. A war against the Voidborn. This planet was one of their last strongholds before the tide turned. The outpost should still have some of their technology, and maybe even some answers. They reached the base of the tower, its surface smooth and reflective. Eris placed his hand against it, and the metal rippled like water. A doorway appeared, revealing a dark interior lit by faint, pulsing lights. As they stepped inside, the air grew cooler, and the faint hum of machinery echoed around them. The walls were covered in intricate patterns and symbols, similar to the ones Max had seen in the clearing. The sight filled him with a strange sense of familiarity, as though he had been here before. Eris moved purposefully, his eyes scanning the walls. The Voidborn are relentless, but they're not unstoppable, he said. This place holds the key to fighting back. And you. Don't say it, Max interrupted. I'm tired of hearing I'm the key to something I don't understand. Eris smirked. Fair enough. But you'll understand soon enough. They entered a central chamber, where a massive console stood at the room's center. Eris activated it, and holographic displays flared to life, filling the air with glowing symbols and shifting images. Max stared in awe as the console began to emit a low, melodic hum. What is this? Max asked. The beginning, Eris said, his voice heavy with meaning. And if we're lucky, it won't also be the end. The whisper of the forgotten. The chamber filled with a pulsating hum as the ancient console came to life. Lights and symbols danced across the walls, casting strange shadows that seemed to move with their own purpose. Max Harper stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest as Eris manipulated the controls with a confidence born of experience. The display above the console began to shift, forming intricate patterns and maps of star systems Max couldn't begin to comprehend. Planets blinked into view, some glowing with vibrant light while others were shrouded in darkness. Lines connected them, forming a network of paths that pulsed faintly with energy. What is this? Max asked, his voice echoing in the chamber. Eris didn't look up. This is a map, he said, his tone calm but purposeful. A map of the galaxy as it was before the Voidborn arrived. It holds the locations of every stronghold, every sanctuary, every fragment of hope left in the universe. Max stared at the display, his eyes darting between the glowing planets. And what does that have to do with me? Eris paused, his hands hovering over the controls. He turned to Max, his golden eyes piercing. This map isn't just a guide. It's a key. And you, he pointed to Max, you're the only one who can unlock its full potential. Max shook his head, frustration bubbling to the surface. You keep saying that, but I don't understand. Why me? I'm not a soldier or a scientist. I'm just a guy who wanted to live a quiet life. Eris sighed, his expression softening. You're more than you think, Max. The woman you met, her people had a prophecy, a vision of someone who could stand against the Voidborn. Someone who could harness the power of the stars themselves. That someone is you. The legacy of the Watchers. Before Max could argue, the console emitted a soft chime. The central display shifted, revealing an image that made Max's breath catch in his throat. It was the same symbol the alien woman had carved into the earth, now glowing with an intensity that seemed almost alive. This symbol, Eris said, gesturing to the display, is the mark of the Watchers. They were an ancient civilization, long before humans even learned to build fire. They were the first to encounter the Voidborn, and the first to fight back. Max stepped closer, drawn to the symbol despite himself. What happened to them? They lost, Eris said simply. The Voidborn destroyed their worlds, consumed their people, and erased almost all traces of their existence. But the Watchers were clever. They left behind fragments of their knowledge, hidden in places like this outpost. They knew that one day, someone would rise to finish what they started. Max stared at the symbol, his mind racing. The visions he had seen, the woman's tears, the urgency in her voice, it all pointed to this moment. But he still didn't understand how he fit into it. Okay, he said slowly, let's say I am this chosen one. What am I supposed to do? I can't fight an entire race of galaxy-eating monsters. Eris smiled faintly. You won't have to. The Watchers left behind something powerful, something that can turn the tide against the Voidborn. But it's hidden, scattered across the galaxy. That's what the map is for. It will guide us to the fragments we need to restore their weapon. Max frowned. And what kind of weapon are we talking about? Eris hesitated, his gaze drifting back to the console. The Watchers called it the Eclipser. It's not a weapon in the traditional sense. It's a force. A counterbalance to the void. But it's incomplete. We'll need to gather the fragments before we can even think about using it. The call of the stars. The chamber fell silent as Max absorbed Eris's words. The weight of the situation pressed down on him, heavy and unrelenting. He thought about the life he had left behind, the quiet solitude he had cherished. But that life felt distant now, like a memory from another time. Where do we start? He asked, his voice quiet but steady. Eris's smile widened, a flicker of approval in his eyes. I was hoping you'd ask. He turned back to the console and tapped a series of symbols. The map zoomed in, focusing on a single planet near the edge of the galaxy. It was dark and foreboding, surrounded by swirling clouds of cosmic debris. This is our first destination, Eris said. Orionis 9. It was once a thriving world, home to one of the Watchers' outposts. If the records are correct, the first fragment of the Eclipser is there. Max studied the planet on the display, his stomach twisting with unease. And what's waiting for us there? Eris's expression darkened. Trouble, most likely. The Voidborn have been scouring the galaxy for Watcher artifacts. If they haven't already found the fragment, they'll have left something behind to stop anyone else from taking it. Max's unease deepened, but he pushed it aside. He had come this far, there was no turning back now. How long will it take to get there? Not long, Eris replied, already moving toward the exit. But we'll need to prepare. Orionis 9 isn't a welcoming place. The shadows of Orionis 9. Hours later, Max found himself back on the ship, staring out the window as the golden planet disappeared into the distance. The stars stretched out before them, endless and unyielding. Despite the uncertainty of their mission, Max felt a strange sense of purpose, a spark of something he hadn't felt in years. Eris worked tirelessly at the controls, fine-tuning their course and running diagnostics on the ship. Max watched him for a while before finally speaking. You seem pretty familiar with all of this. How do you know so much about the Watchers? Eris paused, his hands hovering over the controls. Because I owe them my life, he said quietly. My people were on the brink of destruction when we found one of their outposts. The technology we recovered saved us, for a while, at least. Max frowned. What happened? The Voidborn, Eris said, his voice heavy. They always find you, eventually. My people fought back as best they could, but it wasn't enough. I'm the only one left. Max didn't know what to say. The pain in Eris's voice was raw, and it struck a chord deep within him. He thought of the alien woman, of her tears and her sacrifice. She had known what was at stake, just as Eris did. Then we'd better make this count, Max said, his voice firm. Eris looked at him, a flicker of gratitude in his golden eyes. We will. The descent. As the ship approached Oriones 9, the tension in the cabin grew palpable. The planet loomed ahead, its surface shrouded in darkness. The swirling clouds of debris made navigation difficult, and the ship's sensors blared with warnings. Hold on, Eris said as he guided the ship through the turbulence. The vessel shuddered as it pierced through the planet's atmosphere, and Max gripped his seat tightly. When they finally broke through the clouds, the sight that greeted them was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The surface of Oriones 9 was a wasteland of jagged rocks and blackened ruins. Lightning crackled across the sky, illuminating the desolate landscape in brief, flickering bursts. Welcome to Oriones 9, Eris said grimly. Let's hope we're not too late.